20 minutes. I'm privileged, I think, to be asked to do this because some of us are losing our memories. Dick's better than mine. I look around the room here, and most people not only saw this, they lived this, what we're going to talk about. Hopefully we'll bring back some memories of what it was like here in the 1950s. But we all agree one thing about 1950s and Pocahontas, Arkansas. That was the best time. That was the best era. That was the best economy. That was the best place to be. Now, I'm sure who thinks Walnut Ridge was. We can argue that till the cows come home. They came in a close second.
Always did.
Oh, yeah. Well, except that, let's say it's football LD.
Yeah.
And then they came in first, whatever it was. But you know, you look back, and you think, what am I going to say? 1950s. I really wanted to kind of drop back to the late 40s, where I started school in 1948. As I told Carol Ann, I flunked kindergarten 2 years. I started as a 4-year-old at Alice Vester's kindergarten and didn't get into grade school until 2 years later. So it shows you where I'm coming from today, that my memory was not that good. I didn't know my colors, I didn't know my numbers. I want my grandson who is here, my granddaughter, not paying attention to these stories. These are not real stories, they're made up. They happen to somebody else, but I'm just going to tell them as they happen to me. And by the way, I've got my son and daughter-in-law here. She's running for the school board, she's looking for votes. Caitlin, my granddaughter, is here selling cookie dough. Reed is here just because he had to come to ones at the house. Speaking of eating, you know, I was very fond of ice cream when I was growing up. And you think back to ice cream, the first ice cream you probably had was homemade ice cream with the hand crank. You went down to Slee's and got a block of ice, took it home with an ice pick, chopped it all up and made homemade ice cream. Now, I was fortunate because my grandparents lived on Thomasville. And there's a fellow that had a little bicycle with a little ice box on the front of it that he kept dry ice in. A little ding-a-ling. He'd then come down Thomasville and ring that bell. You'd go out and he'd say ice cream sandwich or somehow these little box there for a dime if you had the dime. But this is early 50s. What really was real spiffy, the drugstores. You had Johnson's on the southeast corner and Perrin's on the northwest corner. And they had curb service. You pulled up in front there, honked your horn twice, and they had a car hop come up and take your order. Or either when you wouldn't delivering that away, he was behind the counter as a soda jerk. And then what happened? A guy named Paul Hatfield shows up. He puts in first fast food in Pocahontas, a Tasty Freeze over in East Pocahontas. I'm sorry, Dairy Queen. I'll get it. See, that's what happens when you're 75. You just stuff goes together. Thank you for the crowd that knows Tasty Freeze. Pardon me?
Paul who?
Paul Hatfield.
That's
later. That was the Bowling King.
Well, that was later.
That's much later, much later. But anyway, here's where the story, here's where it happens, because we got entrepreneurs involved in all this kind of stuff, which I've always been an admirer of entrepreneurs. Gerald Broadway had a portable roller rink right across the street there from the Dairy Queen. It was a tent with a part-time roller rink in it. Gerald he was talking about an entrepreneur. Gerald Broadway drove part-time ambulance for McNabb Ambulance. McNabb had the funeral home and the ambulance. His brother Paul helped him drive. Gerald also delivered furniture for Rainwater's, working for Johnny Kavanagh. And he also raised pigeons for a living. He sold squabs. So he was a go-getter, to say the least. And he comes up this roller rink and he says, all my kids are leaving the roller rink, going across the street to the Dairy Queen. So he buys land north of town, puts in a roller rink, a permanent one, permanent building, and then he builds the Tasty Freeze, and then he puts in a barbecue pit, and he puts Oscar Burr in the buy, and Oscar goes out of business. Of course, Oscar deserved it because Oscar put Bob Smith out of business down at the Hut. Everybody knows where the Hut. Who knows where the Hut was? Very few people know where the Hut was, and Bob Smith was the first British entrepreneur barbecue guy in Pocahontas.
Don't forget the dance floor.
Which dance floor?
At the Tasty Freeze.
Oh, well, that's coming later. We're going to get the dance. That's where you met your future wife, LD. But I'm moving on quite a bit. Anyway, get on down my notes here. Cars, all teenagers like cars. I mean, nobody had a car, no one could afford a car. If you're lucky, your parents had a car. Of course, nobody's house was air conditioned. The cars weren't air conditioned. Houses weren't air conditioned. The theater was air conditioned. But in that time, we had Flem Million had a Ford Murphy dealership here. O.W. McFarland Chevrolet. H.A. Balls had International Harvester trucks, Oldsmobile cars. Elwood Smith had Kaiser Fraser. Everybody had need of Kaiser Fraser. Cletus Price and his partner had Plymouth and Dodge. Bill Taylor had Studebakers and cars and trucks. Glenn Johnson had the Buick dealership here, and Johnny Mobbs had the Pontiac and GMC trucks. Can you imagine? There were 8 new car dealers here in Pocahontas. Now we're down to 1. And there were several used car dealers here. So you had as Tina would drive around, look at the new cars, they'd always come out in August and September, and everybody'd slobber all over one to get one of them, but never going to get one. The real treat was, you go, running ahead of myself. I gotta slow down, Caroline. Get the
Gotta
hook
slow
out.
down.
Slow down, Frank.
Go with
That's it for an hour.
Yeah, I could do that. But I'm trying to move on because I think about my grandchildren, what they like to go to Walmart. Guess what? There was no Walmart. We had dime stores in those days. And one of the first dime stores I remember, 5 and 10 cent, was a Ben Franklin store here that Harris and Bertha Neal Choate had bought from Jim and Hattie King. And it was up on the mid block up there about where the library is. Matter of fact, it was in the second building back this way from the corner. The corner building had been a repair shop when I was a kid, automotive repair shop. And in that, a guy came up with, what's his name? Speaking of Ben Franklin stores, there was a fellow 40 miles south here who had a Ben Franklin store. Who are we talking about? Sam Walton. Anyway, and the competitor to Ben Franklin was Sterling. It was right next door to this building right here. Sterling Stores was owned by a family in Little Rock named Grunfast, who owned the cash wholesale company. Am I still coming in loud and clear? I'm going pretty fast. You got to keep up with me.
I can't write that fast.
Okay, but Joe Peters, Peter Joseph Peters, the guy had two things going for him. He had the best selection of candy in Randolph County. The candy bar went from the length of this room, I guess, and you could buy any size. Everything was a penny, or 2 for a penny, or 3 for a nickel, or whatever it was, and you could stand there all day and peruse the candy bar while he stood there with his arms folded and looked at you to make sure you didn't pick up something and put it in your pocket.
That's right.
But better than that, as a teenager, guess what he had? The most important thing he had. He had a comic book section, and you go in there like you're going to buy one, but you didn't want to buy one. You didn't have a dime to buy one because he went from a nickel to a dime, like Marvin Wells. You know what that son of a gun did? First taste of inflation. Marvin had a Coke machine up there. You put a nickel in, raise the door, and pull a bottle of Coke out for a nickel. My first taste of inflation. Marvin moved the price to 6 cents. He took a 20% price increase. You had to have a nickel and a penny to get a Coke. To get back to Joe Pete, you could stay there on Saturday morning for 2 or 3 hours and peruse the comic books like you were going to buy one. You weren't going to buy one. You were just going to read some of them. When he ran you off, you go down to Johnson's drugstore and looked at their peruse, because they both, did that kind of business. They did. We had, I guess, with Harrison birthday, I called it the Paragould invasion. You had Earl Van Hook, who was partners with Van Atkins, and Homer Atkins were partners. They'd had stores in Paragould, and now they put one. Pocahontas was on the move. Pocahontas was attracting a lot of people. Look at Sue, her dad came from Paragould. Marion Pupil had come from Paragould. Jim I've got them all listed here, I'll have to look at them. Jim McDaniel.
Paul Bolin.
Paul Ray, his dad, brought Paul with him. You knew that, didn't you, Mr. Bolin? You knew that your grandpa did that morning. Make a long story. And they had a fellow here by the name of Adrian White who came from Paragould and put in a radio station. So can you imagine Pocahontas was more attractive for the future than was Paragould? Those guys would have stayed over there and made their fortune. Wouldn't have to come here. So there was something going for us in the 50s here. Several things happened to us in the 1950s. We went dry. We were voted wet again after Prohibition, 1933. We were wet for almost 20 years, the last go around. We built the bypass on the east side of town. We built the hospital. The radio station came here. Natural gas was put in, and we built the hospital, all within a period of 2 or 3 years. So things were booming, and we were the recipients of young people here to see all that stuff kind of happen. TV. Reed, you won't believe this. TVs were rare. The first TV we got here was Channel 5 out of Memphis. It was an NBC affiliate. They went on the air in December the 11th of 1948, but nobody had a TV in 1948 here. But early 50s, they started showing up. You had to have an antenna on top of your house. It was reached to the moon. You could turn that sucker just right, and after dark, it'd get almost clear. You could see a picture. The rest of the day it's snowing. You couldn't hear anything. And they rerun everything, and they give you a test pattern for the first hour and a half on the picture of an Indian's head on that thing. And you sit there and watch that Indian head where the show would finally come on. At midnight, they'd cut the thing off and show you that Indian head again as they played the national anthem. So we didn't have much selection. Here's what happened. How many years ago, 1952, there was an election with Eisenhower and, I wrote his name down long ago, Stevenson. All summer long, they did nothing to have Democratic and Republican national conventions. Took up the whole summer. Here I'm 10 years old. I want to watch the Lone Ranger, and they've got these old men that are yapping and yapping and yapping all summer long. And it was hot, Reed. There wasn't any air conditioner there. If you were lucky, you had a window fan. If you were really on the uppity scale, you had an attic fan. It really cooled you off at night. You lay that at night, the sheets would still be wet. I mean, you just lay there and just drowned in your hot air. But you listen, had the windows up, you had screens if you were looking, you listen to the sounds of the night. You listen to crickets and birds. You hear the railroad running. You hear Sally's Mill in the daytime blow their whistle. You hear the church bells. You hear the clickety-clickety of the bridge they're tearing down now coming across the Black River. You hear all those sounds now. And you smell like honeysuckle and odd flavors of the night. We miss all that now because we got our windows shut. And we moved in off the front porch. And we got a TV and an air conditioner. But if you liked boxing those days, they had Monday night fights, Tuesday night fights, Thursday night fights, Friday night fights, and Saturday night fights. They boxed all the time. Radio. And Abram came with AM. There was no FM stations in those days. And the real thrill for guys out in the day tonight, they'd pick up a 50,000 watt station. There were several of those around. One in New Orleans, one in Nashville, and one in Chicago, WLS in Chicago. The cheater of all this was down in Del Rio, Texas. The guy had a 100,000 watt station in the antenna for him to broadcast that. The FCC wouldn't allow that. He put his antenna over in Mexico and broadcast out of Del Rio, Texas. And sold everything from autographed Jesus pictures to everything you could imagine. Is that right? Okay, I got some verification. Rock and roll. I remember this, John Jackson I was talking about too long ago. Memphis was the headquarters of rock and roll here. Make no mistake about it. The bands over there left, they'd sleep all morning, get up at noon and have lunch. Then they'd get in their cars and they'd drive to a town that had a drive-in theater. And they'd get on top of the projection house and play from like 5 o'clock in the afternoon till about dark. When it got dark enough to see the picture, the projection house was just a block building, had bathrooms in there, and concession stands, and the projector. At about dark time, they'd pack up all their gear and they'd move to some honky-tonk, either Newport or Paragould or Poplar Bluff or sometimes Current River Beach if you were lucky and the right crowd was coming. But anyway, the movie came on and everybody, the people watched the movie. When you got older, you'd take your girlfriend to the movie and never watch the movie. I was thinking about, Sue, you weren't there. You wouldn't go to the movies with me. That's okay. I understand. I forgive you after 65 years. I forgive you. Elvis Presley came through once or twice promoting this before payola. He came to get somebody to play his records. I don't think there's any money. I don't think anybody here took money for the payola. But his original band, he had Scotty Moore as his guitarist. The guy that actually discovered him. He had a drummer named DJ Fontana. Then he had a bass player, played stand-up bass, a guy named Bill Black. Well, Bill Black left Elvis early and started his own combo. And he'd come to hear him play up at Current River Beach. He was probably our most famous. The more notoriety would be Roy Orbison, the original Ooby Dooby man. You all remember the Ooby Dooby song? Oh, yeah. Ooby Dooby. And what does Ooby Dooby mean, Reed? Don't tell anybody, I won't tell you. Ooby Dooby. Of course, Jerry Lee Lewis. Those guys were really hanging out down at Newport and up at Poplar Bluff. You had a bigger crowd, and that place was wet. We weren't wet. We had to sneak in our drinks. Bill Spikes and Earl Ray Michels were seniors, and we were our juniors at that time. They were Paragould, and all of a sudden they came back to Pocahontas out at Broadway's little dance floor and showed us how to dance to Rock Around the Clock. Guy with Bill Haley and the Comets, and that was the first time things really got wild and kids started doing something besides whatever they were doing. And we talked about the Beatles, and I've got a picture in a minute. They actually, I hate to tell you this, Sue, they never in Walnut Ridge. They landed at the airport out there. They got, three of them went in the small plane and one of them went in the station wagon. I just came from there last weekend. They had the last of their auction. The Reed Pigman Ranch sold to the state of Missouri. That's where these guys vacationed up there for 3 days on the 11-Point River. And I've got a bevy of pictures here. I'm going to probably donate to Walnut Ridge from that. But that's good times. That was early 60s. I guess I'm still on key. Got 5 minutes. I get thinking about, health. And Sue, you'll have to correct me on this. Polio struck fear in all the parents in the 50s. I mean, they didn't want you to go swimming. They didn't want you to go with crowds. They didn't want you to do anything. Because we had 3 or 4 kids in town that got polio and were crippled. They put you in an iron lung, Ray. If you're seeing a picture of an iron lung, it wouldn't be a very comfortable place to live. And a lot of these people were crippled for life, just as the president was earlier. But anyway, they came up with Sue was a Cuba globulin, the first thing they tried to give you, and it didn't. It worked on some people, it didn't completely. And then they came up with Dr. Joe Salk came up with a vaccine that would prevent polio. A vaccine. I remember they line us up at school, and you get your shot. Everybody hated to go there. When you got your booster, they came up with a different way of giving you a new shot. They put the medicine and a cube of sugar. I could have hugged that guy's neck. Who was he? I liked that guy. Until I got in the Army, we didn't get any sugar cubes in the Army, just the regular old stuff.
Don't forget Teen Town.
Well, I was going to talk about Teen Town. Do you remember what they had a contest to name Teen Town here? And Nancy Campbell came up with the theme of we're going to call it Dungaree Hall. Why do you get Dungaree Hall, Sue?
Because of the song Dungaree Doll.
Dungaree Doll, sung by Eddie.
I don't know. I can sing it, but I
Your
don't.
memory is terrible.
I didn't know that.
Eddie Fisher.
Eddie
Hey,
Fisher.
Fisher.
Yes. Dungaree Doll. Thank you. And Nancy Campbell won that contest for naming it Dungaree Hall. And, you know, folks in Pocahontas, we didn't wear dungarees, we wore blue jeans. What the heck's dungaree? Yeah. Yeah, think about all that kind of stuff and the health and going on with the things. And when I was a little kid, the last dentist, the only dentist we had was a guy named Dr. Stuttle, who had a daughter named Mary Alice Stuttle. They left here in the early 50s and went to Fayetteville. He was about retired then, and he was replaced by Dr. Spikes and Dr. McCleskey, and as they say later on, other doctors. But there's a famous Dr. Dunn and Imbo. Everybody remember Dr. Dunn and Imbo? Here's the stories of Dr. Dunn and Imbo. He worked cheap.
Yeah.
And he was, they said, kind of a bad place to walk into. It looked like dead bodies laying there, and all leftover teeth and everything. It wasn't a real pleasant place. But anyway, early doctors here were Dr. Brown, and you go to get your shot, and or to Dr. Hamill or Dr. Rocker. They were old men. They were probably old as we are now. Old men. Then followed by Matt Boston, and the new doctors, Dr. Scott and Smith, and then followed by Bray and those guys. There weren't a lot of jobs. Pocahontas was on the move. That's why those guys prepared to move. There was something happening here. There's things getting exciting. Things are starting to move here. The war was over. The inflation not kicked in yet. Korean War was pretty well behind us, and Vietnam had not yet started. So in 1948, Brown Shoe Company moved here from St. Louis down to the old McFall building down here. Does anybody remember what minimum wage, what they made per hour in 1948, what minimum wage was?
About 30 cents an hour.
40 cents. I looked all this up.
I went to work for 30 cents an hour.
Well, they cheated you. You must have, because you were a woman. They did the same thing to women then. They're doing it to women today. They didn't make the same equivalent of what a man made. But 40 cents was the minimum wage in 1940s, 1948. But anyway, and by the late 50s, is that my first warning of the end?
First warning.
Huh? I got 2 minutes left. I'll make this quick.
Yeah, Carolyn.
I'm not going to talk about the factories and all that kind of stuff. I can follow that up. Entertainment, we had a golf course over on the airport, which replaced one out north of where I live out there now. There's a golf course back right before World War II. Again, pre-air conditioning. Imperial Arena, bowling alleys, Curtain River Beach, homes and cars, no air conditioning. Law and order. Back then, the mayor didn't appoint the chief of police. He ran on a ticket. And Butch Stowe usually won. If he didn't, Estill Brand won. They kind of take turns. The loser would get the night marshal's job. Now, in fact, we had 2 policemen in Pocahontas one day and one night. We had a sheriff and a deputy. The deputy lived down above the jailhouse down behind the courthouse with his family down there. And we had one state trooper that he lived below.
Yeah, yeah. Jail,
Thank you. You're right. You were down there. You know, you were pretty that down. Sue, you were there more often than I was. You lived across the street. I didn't make it down as often as you did. But you're right, I was wrong. Upstairs, downstairs.
Upstairs.
But we had one state trooper, a guy named Kenneth Bean. Kenneth covered 4 counties: Lawrence County, Randolph County, Greene County, and Clay County.
Wow.
And that was those 5 men. That was our police enforcement for Randolph County and Pocahontas. 5. Down at the mayor's office, that crazy mayor hired all kind of guys, 4 or 5 at one shift. The first car they got was a 1951 tan Plymouth. Didn't have a radio because there wasn't anybody to talk to. He was in it by himself. He had a buggy whip on that thing, but no radio. I got to tell one story. I'll tell this one story and then you ring the bell. And I tore myself between telling the Ollie D. Clerk story or the gas mask story. But I'm going to tell the Ollie D. Clerk story. Max Callaghan, whose father was the principal of the high school, and little Raymond Jackson was on this too. With Ollie D. Clerk down behind his house, everybody knows where he lives over on Town Creek. Back in his backyard, he had chickens back there, and they had that chicken yard just picked slick. There wasn't a blade of grass left. Well, Max Callaghan and I would go up to Joe Pete's and buy a package of firecrackers, take them and throw them over in that lot there, and all the chickens were on their thing with something to eat. And by the time they picked it up, the firecrackers blow up, they blow their beaks off. This D. Clerk didn't like that because she had to make dumplings instead of getting eggs. So she had. I don't want to tell this story anymore. I got to quit that story. But anyway, Ray was in on that too. You didn't hear that? I didn't tell that story,
He's
Rick.
grown.
My family, Larry Don, you might have been on this. We had a little chicken house up behind my grandparents that we made a clubhouse out of. And up the old grade school, they had a first floor, the second floor where the big kids went, and above that there was an attic. And somebody had stored some paint up there and it dried out. But one of the kids discovered you liked that dried paint, it'd smoke and fill a room full of smoke. Well, every kid back in the 40s and early 50s had either a canteen or a belt, a helmet liner. Everybody was into the war type stuff. That's why Max and I were down there throwing hand grenades at those chickens. We were playing army. Well, we like this smoke, this paint, it gets this room with smoke. We go in there and we put a gas mask on. It had little hose that came out of it. We didn't have a canister. We'd put the hose in our back pocket. Then we'd climb, that was our filter. We'd climb in that house and see how long we could stay in there. But anyway, one day we quit that and go up to play football in front of Manuel Bigger's yard, and here comes the only fire truck. It pulls in their dry wing, pulls down there, that little house is just, the frame is showing. That thing's engulfed by one large flame. That thing went up in smoke because of our fire we built there. Now, Reed, I'm not going to give you the real bad stories, okay? Can I finish with that one?
Yeah.
Okay, we're on Pocahontas. Hey, best life the world can have. Best time, best economy, best friends. Friends I've had all, I think about all the friends I've had out there. I've got some pictures I want to show. Is Ann Carroll here yet? I've got something for her. She not coming?
She was afraid I'd embarrass her.
Hey, Carol Ann, and she was right.
I'm Carroll. I never had a chance. My father, Bill Carroll, was elected wittiest boy in the album when he graduated, and my mother, Ann Blankenship, was the wittiest girl. All of my life they played tricks on me. I'm not exaggerating, it was quite traumatic. Here's something they didn't have back in the 50s. These purses. I love them. They have two handles, they carry a lot, and I use them all the time. Okay, at school. Well, you walk to school. There was no buses anywhere. You walked to school. You certainly walked to grade school. Now, the high school was way out there, so you walked to the grade school and rode a bus to the high school, or carpooled with some friends that your mother made arrangements for, or you'd walk to the high school. Not very many rode their bikes. In the parking lot at the high school, there was about 60 cars, and a third of those belonged to teachers. And I can name who owned the other cars. There wasn't very many. All right, home economics class. Every female, every girl took home ec from Miss Mary. Well, here I was in the 9th grade, and I had the list of classes I could take. I looked over it with Mama. Mama, I don't want to take home ec. Why not? Well, why would I want to? I don't want to cook and sew. She said, if you don't want to take home ec, you don't have to. So I signed up for driver's ed. Well, the school contacted my parents, and because there'd never been a girl not take home ec in the history of Pocahontas before. And they told the school that I didn't have to take it if I didn't want to, and they supported me. So, girls today that don't take home ec, you can thank me. I was the first one. I remember, maybe they didn't have it back then. I remember my first class of the day was history. The first thing you do is take your arm and wipe your desk off, because they had all this blown asbestos ceiling and all these flakes would be all over your desk. I thrived on asbestos. All right, the cafeteria, everybody ate in the cafeteria. You couldn't go anywhere and eat, you didn't have a car. I remember those bowls of commodity peanut butter sitting on the tables. Oh, it was good. You could have all you wanted. Another thing in school, ballpoint pens had not been invented. We all used fountain pens. Okay, food. Whether you ate out, which no one did hardly ever, or cooked it at home, you could not have, you'd never consider chicken or fish that didn't have bones in it. And now, I want nuggets, they wouldn't eat it if it had a bone in it. We loved bones. Watermelon, you buy them out on Highway 67. They'd always plug it for you. The groceries, you would call Pratt's grocery store, read the list, and they would deliver it to your house.
And if you weren't home, they'd put it in your refrigerator.
There was no fast food.
Joe Broadway.
There wasn't any frozen food. And again, eating out once a year, maybe. We'd go to Oscar's Barbecue down on 67. All right, clotheslines. I cannot tell you how many miles of clothes I hung on clotheslines and how many hours a week I stood ironing after sprinkling the clothes. We didn't have a steam iron. That's why people have daughters, is to do those things. One of the biggest days of my life was in 1965. Permanent press. I never will forget it. They had pillowcases, permanent press. I was living up in Illinois. Permanent press. All right, the summer heat. We'd go out to the swimming hole at Mill Creek. Once you were brave enough to get in, you could really cool off. We'd go to the sandbar on Black River. We'd go to Current River Beach. They did have a big pavilion up there. And in the summer, they sold candy bars at the concession stand. Nothing had air conditioning anywhere. So the candy bars were warm. And the Snickers in the summer, they'd have all these little worms come out of the nuts. But they did not affect the flavor.
More protein.
We spent a lot of time sitting in the yard.
Wash tub.
And we'd take, wash tub. And we also take the garden hose and squirt each other. I mean, it was fun and felt good. Yes, the attic fan. I started Arkansas State College in 1960. The dormitories were not air conditioned. The room I had was about the size of this table, and it had bunk beds in it. Carroll boys had one, and I had the upstairs one. I cannot tell you how hot it was. Mosquitoes. Mama was a good mama. Every evening, she'd have me get in bed, and she'd come with this big thing and spray me with DDT. Then, every summer, so that we didn't get sick and die, all the neighborhood kids had to go to Atlanta Saloons and get our shots. Diphtheria, tetanus, and typhoid. The Salk vaccine did come out in 52. The needle was about that long, and they gave it in your hiney. Measles. There wasn't any measles vaccination or anything. Mama, being a good mama, found out that Harold A. Simpson had measles. So she took me over there to play with him. So I would go ahead and get him and get it over with. That's the ice plant. There would be cars backed all the way to 67 from Slee Brothers Ice Plant. Dial phones. Our telephone number was Twin Oaks 206W. That was our telephone number. and you had to dial the TW for Twin Oaks. But I do remember having Central, and I do remember party lines. If you didn't have a party line, you had to pay $2 extra a month. What did we do for fun? We had Teen Town, which was upstairs of the courthouse. Once a year, we would have the tap dance. Who remembers the tap dance? Teens Against Polio.
Oh, yeah.
We had that dance every year to raise money to fight polio. Something else fun in the summer, about once a year, somebody's mama would drive us to Kearney. They had a motel with a swimming pool. I can't tell you how many miles I water skied on Black River. We went to football games. Frank talks about boxing, big deal. I went to wrestling and watched Sputnik Monroe. The TVs, they were black and white. The kids were the remote control. Also, if it wasn't just right, Daddy would go outside and twist the antenna, and one of the kids would stand at the window and relay a message from Mama. A little bit more. The other thing was, like I said, there were black and white TVs, but you could get a sheet of colored cellophane and hang on the front of your TV, and it would have 3 or 4 rainbow-like colors in it, and you got to watch colored TV. I would roller skate from our house on Black Street all the way to the Baptist church. My skates would come off about 10 times in round, but the Baptist church had the big, wide, smooth sidewalk. Eventually, as Frank mentioned, we had the skating rink. I cannot tell you how many miles I skated. Every week, at least 2 nights, would skate for hours. Daddy backed over my bike, so I didn't get to use it much. Also for fun. Oh, we go to the Imperial Picture Show. On Saturday, Mama give me a quarter. It cost a dime to get in. A bag of popcorn was a nickel, and a Coke was a dime. I usually didn't get the Coke, I saved it, the money. And we did go to the drive-in, everybody did. Yes, there was the Dairy Queen, the Tasty Freeze, and the L&K Dip, which was catty-cornered from the Imperial Theater. L&K Dip was, of course, Limbaugh King. We had bunking parties. They had a big pavilion up at Current River Beach, and people would go and dance, but we didn't. There may have been bad people there. I never will forget my transistor radio. Everybody had transistor radio. We danced the bop. Now, clothes. I was going to wear my muumuu this evening, but I didn't think you'd understand. How many of you remember the muumuu? That was the most wonderful clothes ever invented, and why it stopped, I don't know. We had can-can slips. You'd wear anywhere from 3 to 8 can-can slips, and they would get so heavy that you would tie, not really a rope, but some strip of something around your waist to hold them up. To school, you wore a skirt and a blouse. The shoes were often penny loafers.
The socks.
And if you were lucky, you had a mouton.
Yes.
Sunbathing. We sunbathed all summer, every summer. You wanted to make sure you got a good tan, so you would get baby oil and put iodine in it and mix it up and rub it all over you. What? You don't have to. I knew you'd have that. Okay, the car. the cars were all standard shift until 1958. Don McFall would let people take turns riding on Thomasville in his car. Now, be real quiet. Did you feel it? Did you feel it? It shifted. Did you feel it? That was when automatic transmission came out. There was no air conditioning anywhere. No homes, no cars, no nothing. The hospitals were not air conditioned. The VA hospital where I worked at Fayetteville wasn't air conditioned until 75. Oh, it was hot. Well, some of us here in this room, I mean, you could only get so hot. So we would roll the windows up in our car and drive around the court square making people think we had air conditioning. And we were dripping. We shopped at Van Adkins and Ben Franklin's and Sterling's and Joe Peek's. I'm finished.
No, she's
I
still
was
has,
2 minutes over.
she still has some time left.
Does anyone have any questions?
Wait, did you have to iron, when you were talking about ironing, did you have to iron the hankies even,
Oh,
every little
Well,
thing?
if you didn't, it was a wadded up mess.
Yeah.
You ironed the
I remember
boxer
that.
shorts that had been made out of flour sack material.
The younger kids.
You didn't tell about riding your horse.
You sure
Oh
did.
yes, I love Cecil.
You rode it by my house every day.
Yes. When I was a little kid, I wanted to grow up and be a horse. And there was a period of time, I don't know how long, but I remember it. I was old enough to remember it. I would eat only dry oats and shredded wheat biscuits. That was my hay and oats, and I would drink water. I also would stomp my feet on tin cans and trot up and down Black Street, and I could hear my echo against the houses, and I had a perfect trot. I had a lot of fun. What else?
Poodle skirts, you all didn't have the poodle skirts in Pocahontas?
Yeah. Not very many people had them. See, another thing, people say, if I knew back then what I know now, that's a horrible thing to say. Back then, you didn't know any better. Everything was lovely. You didn't want TV dinners and chicken nuggets and all that stuff. It was a wonderful time. If you think of it, it's probably the happiest time of your life. You played every day.
Best time to be
Except
raised.
when you were ironing.
Oh, I ironed a lot.
Pat and Billy not iron?
No, boys don't iron.
But she did.
Speaking of the
She did
ironing,
make me be her horse. And she
well,
would
I
hook reins up to me and ride me around the
I
yard.
always wanted a horse. So I took some rope and fashioned a bridle and reins and caught Billy and rigged him up with this. And I could go like this and make him go. Well, we were going down a hill too fast and I turned him too sharp and he fell where we burned garbage and cut himself and I didn't get to do it anymore. I had a good time. Yes, I still have a good time. Yeah, I probably would have embarrassed Mama. There's a lot of things I just couldn't tell. Right, Sue?
Right,
Was that during the bunking party?
some of it. But not all.
There was more happened in the 50s. Dick Olvey goes next. He'll talk about the 60s, but the 50s were something. There was no boom boxes, no internet, no just a million words that you use now every day wouldn't have made sense back then. You couldn't use those words. They didn't have a definition.
One of you two knows about all the fires we had, all the
Which
going
ones?
downtown, you know, when, was it Van Atkins that burned?
No.
No, but
Sterling.
Street.
Sterling.
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 Street, yeah, Sterling. Yeah, that block between Joe
Church of
Pizza.
Christ burned, and the Baptist church burned. There was a lot of fires
Had an
downtown.
explosion there by the Diane Theater.
Oh, yeah.
Well, hey, don't forget.
Marvin Wells' service station
Don't
was-
forget, Byrne, don't forget Southern Baptist College.
Yeah. At that time, you're talking about the one that was at Pocahontas.
Tasty fruit.
and the fire department was volunteers, and all the volunteer fire department were on the fire phone inner workings.
Prior to that, Carolyn,
And
Selene's
there-
Mill would pull their
There would
whistle
be
down there, let everybody know a real rapid.
there would be
Yes.
that's a secret. If there was a fire somewhere, the fire phone would go off. It was one continuous long ring, and you'd pick up the phone, and there must have been 80 people on the party line. They were all saying, "Where's the fire? Where's the fire?" Well, I'll tell you where it was one day. Down behind our house, everybody burned their trash in their backyard, and it often got away from you, but you could manage it with a throw rug and a broom. Well, one day it was moving toward our shed, so we had to call the fire department at noon. And I never will forget looking out the kitchen window. There was men coming from every direction to our house. I've never seen so many people coming to fight a fire, and of course it was our garbage. But it could have been worse. But they came from everywhere, and all from the fire phone. Am I through?
Yes.
Dixon, time's up.
You went through 10 minutes.
It's only got, 5 minutes.
I couldn't help but add to what she said back what she was talking about. I was on the volunteer fire department. I was on 25 years. I retired. And when you went on the fire department as a rookie, the first thing they did, Bill Jones or Bill Carroll would bring the fire phone. And everybody you just pick it up and listen. They'd tell you where it was. But the rookies, they'd set off that dadgum phone, and you'd pick it up, and either Bill Carroll or Bill Jones would say, "Who is this?" And you'd say, "I'd say, Dick Olvey. Dick Olvey's house. Dick Olvey's house." Here comes the whole damn fire department.
A whole bunch of them.
A whole bunch of them right in front of your yard, you know, and all the neighbors are coming out to see what's wrong. I wasn't going to tell a story, but when I walked in, I saw this picture. And I heard this story about this elderly lady. She was about our age. She was actually 82. She went on a cruise on a ship. And she decided to go out and get some air. So she walked out on the deck and had a big old floppy hat, as you know the ladies do when they're dressed up. Had a big floppy hat. And she walked up to the rail, and the wind was blowing really hard. So she took her hat off and she put it against the rail, leaned up against it. She was just watching the waves, and this gentleman came by. He said, "Excuse me, ma'am," said, "your skirt's blowing up in the back." She said, "I know it." He said, "But ma'am, you don't have any undergarments on." "I know it." She said, "But what you see down there is 82 years old, and I just bought this damn hat yesterday." That wasn't in my notes. I couldn't pass that up.
And we wore hats to church every Sunday.
Yes, every Sunday the big hats. But you know, back in the late 40s, the 50s, and the early 60s, we didn't do anything bad. We were mischievous. We didn't do anything bad. We didn't steal. You know, we just didn't do bad things. We
Didn't
knew
think about it.
that. We didn't even think about it. That's right. We never heard of marijuana or any kind of dope. Hell, I didn't hear about it till I was out of college.
Didn't even know about her since.
No.
Gay was happy.
Yeah, that's right. Gay was happy. But, I will say, I wouldn't want to tell anything on Frank, but I can tell on myself and Frank and Nick. We did steal something once.
Watermelon.
We did. No, we didn't even do that. My granddad had a cabin on Glen Point River, and Frank and Nick and I were there every Friday night. And as soon as the football game was over, or Friday night, we were at the cabin till Sunday night. Granddad had an old John boat that he kept parked on the little floating dock down there, and we'd take that and paddle. We didn't have a motor. And we'd paddle across the river. A gentleman named Argo Rush owned that land over there, acres and acres and acres. Had a water wheel up in the cabin. We couldn't go up there because we didn't have a motor. Couldn't paddle up Leadenhorn, of course. So we'd take the boat, and sometimes we'd go across the river, and we'd sit on the bank and fish. And we were sitting out there fishing one time, and I was sitting down here, and Frank was sitting right close to me, and Nick was a little ways on up the river on the bank. Here came Mr. Rush. Well, he had a stump out there. Some of you remember that. You drove in through his cornfield, and he had a stump out there, and if you were going to his water wheel to picnic, you had to put a quarter in that stump. Well, we didn't know there was a stump there. We didn't even come in. We took the boat over there. So he comes up to me and he says, you boys didn't put a quarter in the stump. And I said, no, sir. I said, what are you talking about? Well, he said, if you go to my water wheel. I said, we're not going to water wheel. Well, you're on my land. You owe me a quarter. I said, okay. So I gave him a quarter. Frank says, I don't have a quarter. Give him a quarter for me. I said, okay. So I gave him 50 cents. You remember that?
Yeah.
Well, it goes on down to Nick. He gets Nick's quarter. So we get back to the cabin that night, we're talking, and we might have had a beer, I don't know, maybe. Frank had a 59 Ford, had a trunk in it as big as his room. We discovered that Mr. Rush had took Frank's quarter from me and Frank's quarter from Nick. So we, back then, Nick's mom and dad had Hillcrest Motel and Restaurant. They served fresh corn for 2 months out of Hillcrest Restaurant. We filled the trunk of that 59 Ford corn. We got our dollar's worth back.
There's a PS to that story.
What's the PS?
Years later, Nick owned the abstract company, and Argo sells his farm. He comes in there, and Nick was charging $1 a page for an abstract. And Argo comes in to get his abstract done, and Nick charges him $2 a page for his abstract. And Argo says, well, Nick, just charge. He says, Argo, you stole from Dick Olvey and Frank Bigger, and I'm back there, this is just my money with interest.
Nick's like a bulldog. He never forgot. He still doesn't. But times were, they really were better back then. When we went to high school, those of us had a car, a pickup. During hunting season, we had a shotgun or a rifle in the back seat, or in the window. If we had a truck, you remember, he had a gun rack in the back, we'd take him to school. There wasn't a boy in middle school or high school didn't have a pocket knife in his pocket. Nobody thought anything about that. We smoked in college, in class, at the University of Arkansas. We smoked in class. It's all right. Most of you don't know I finished college in 3 years. Larry knows. I went to the University of Arkansas, and after 3 years, the dean called me and told me I was finished. Go home. True story. But things were easier back then. When you went to Fayetteville, when you went to school, you crossed the ferry at Norfolk Lake. And if you knew the schedule, it left this side on the hour and the half hour, and it left the other side and started back on the quarter hour and then the whatever. And if you knew that schedule, you could get about 10 miles. If you drive real fast, you could make it or slow down because you knew you weren't going to make it. But that was, we crossed the ferry. Can you imagine crossing a ferry now to go anywhere? Of course, we had one at Reno. We had a ferry at Reno. If you crossed the Current River up there, you went across the ferry. I guess Mr. Cox owned that, didn't he?
Yes, the last time before it stole the state. We had one at Bigger's too.
Yeah, Bigger's had one too.
Oh yeah. Theirs was metal, ours was wood, we had the cheap.
They were a lot slower back then. Peter Variety Store, Joe Pete's. Frank, you remember anytime you went in, like Frank said, everything was a nickel or a dime or 3 cents.
Pennies.
Or a penny. But if you bought anything and had change coming back, don't you want a piece of gum? Don't you want to buy one of these? You never got change back. Miss Ophelia's going to get that last penny, no matter what, because gum, you can buy a piece of bubble gum for a penny. You got a penny coming back, don't you want a piece of gum? And she would follow you around, remember?
Oh, absolutely.
She'd
With her
follow
arms
you.
crossed.
She'd follow you around and watch you so you didn't steal anything or pick up anything.
Scare you to death.
Yeah. We went I guess it was Tuesday night, my dad would take me when I was a kid to Joe Pete's. And I'd get a comic book. I could only get a nickel. They were a dime, but she had used ones for a nickel. And Dad went down and bought a paper once a week. And I got a nickel comic book every week at Joe Pete's. And then we did have the dime store. We called them dime stores. They were 5 and 10s, I think. I remember Harris Chokes. Larry Don sold popcorn at Harris Chokes. I remember going down and getting popcorn for, what was it, nickel?
Popcorn was, no, it was a dime.
It was a dime.
At that time, he was a dime a bag of
Yeah.
popcorn.
And what happened if you came up short at the end of the day? If you
Don't
didn't,
want to hear.
you better have every, he counted the sacks, didn't he?
Yeah. We sold them during the election campaign speeches, you know.
Candidate speakings.
I've sold $100 worth of popcorn and sodas at 10 cents a piece on Saturdays down there. That's back in, like you said, in the late 50s and 60s.
I remember a couple other stories. I remember the story, I didn't see it because it was before my time, but cars didn't have, like they said, radios or all this stuff, but they came out with a cigar lighter. First year they came out with a cigar lighter. They called them cigar lighters back then. And my granddad Albee in Harrison, Dad was born and raised up around Harrison. He and Orville Faulkner were good friends. My granddad bought it was a used car, but it had a cigar lighter in it. My granddad always smoked a cigar, always had one in his mouth, like a lot of cigar smokers, you know. It may have been this long, but he had that thing in his mouth all day. The first car he got with a cigar lighter, he was going home. He had that cigar and he pulled that lighter out and stuck it on his nose. To the day he died, when he bought a new car, he'd take out that damn cigarette lighter and throw it out the window. Times were different back then.
Dick, one of the things, everybody come to town on Saturday afternoon, and the majority of the people went to Cox's restaurant, or another restaurant, the Colonial Hotel, and then everybody went to the movie, where Linda's mom and dad ran it, you know, for, I don't know who they started out with,
Burst in
Martin,
Smith.
yeah, but Max and Geraldine, you know, ran that theater and him drive in, and then ran a little bit, I think, before it burned down. But that was just a thing to do on Saturdays. When you come to town, everybody visited. They sat in their cars and eat their lunch or whatever.
Stores would stay open at 9, 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it was something to see, really, and I wish they still did it. You know, it was a good atmosphere. And then one thing,
You want the microphone?
no, but I want to tell one about the old boy that I can't remember what his name is, but some guy owed him money and he chained him to that fire hydrant there in front of back down there was hardware, because he wouldn't pay him. You remember, Frank? You remember that, don't you?
Yeah, well, I know it was, really was.
That was something to say. He chained him up there, locked him up right there.
I remember the Rotary Club back before I was in the Rotary Club or anybody had a goat. And if you missed a meeting, Sue remembers.
Tie that goat in your front yard for a
You
week.
had to keep the goat for a week if you missed a Rotary Club meeting. I remember that well, but I loved it when we got to keep the goat. Mom and Dad didn't like it much, especially Mom, but I really liked it.
It was an incentive to go to the Rotary.
Yeah. You know, kids are smarter today than we were. Yeah, they are. They are. I called my son the other day. I had something come up. He said, Dad, don't ever, you know, if you see something on the computer, don't do it before you ask me, because I'd already done that a few times. You're not supposed to do that sometimes. So I called him. I got this thing. I said, Lance, I got this whatever on my computer. And he said, what does it say? And I started reading it to him, and he said, Dad, just send it to me. I said, don't know how. He said, take a picture of your damn phone and text it to me. I never would have thought of that. Would you have thought of that?
You said I don't know how.
I knew how to do that. I did know how to do that. My grandchildren teach me about my computer. Kids are smarter because of the computer.
But they're not better educated. You talk to kids, I'm talking about kids even up in their 30s. They can't tell you the capitals of the different states. They can't tell you a whole lot of things. And on Channel 8, those announcers, they keep me in stitches. One day, they were talking about somebody that sent a gift, a baby gift to the Duke and Duchess.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn now, Dick. You got 20 seconds.
Okay, I'm about through my 20 minutes about
Dick, go as long as you want to.
I remember, I gotta tell a story about Orville Paul. Both of us, like I said, he and Dad were friends. And my grandfather had the cabin on the river. And my granddad was never a politician, but his friends were politicians. He loved to entertain. Most of you have been there to my granddad's cabin to some of the parties he had. He never had a president or anybody, but governors and statesmen would come up. And they had a grand time out there. Well, Mr. Faubus came up one time and he had his entourage with him, the Rockefellers and the Stevens. He loved to swim, and my granddad, I think I told you, had a floating dock. And Mr. Faubus got up one morning, they'd spent the night, had the big goat roast. He went down to swim, and Mr. Rockefeller and Mr. Stevens went with him. And they were standing on the dock, and he jumps in, and most of you know Levin was pretty swift, but the water's only this deep on me, that's waist deep under the dog. And he jumps in, and he's swimming along, he's just swimming with the current, you know, he can stand up, and he's swimming along right below the dock. He swam about 5 minutes, I was sitting on the other end of the dock fishing. I still like to fish. Mr. Stevens looked at Mr. Rockefeller, he said, Rock said, you better jump in and get the governor, somebody's gonna drown. I said, he's all right. Well, he said, you better jump in there, get the governor, says he's gonna drown. He said, you jump in there and get him, you got more money invested in him than I do. I never will forget that. And I guess that was probably true. I gotta remember to, I know my time's up, but I gotta tell one.
Go ahead.
Jim McDaniel, we had some characters growing up. Jim McDaniel,
I worked for him.
I remember that. Mr. Futrell, you know, gosh, Futrell Hardware is still in business, you know. Homer Jarrett, J.D. Bennett. We had some characters. I gotta tell a story on J.D. Paul Bowman, yeah. J.D. was, of course, worked for Jim, and he was quite a cut-up anyway, and they were always cutting up. Gentleman came in the hardware store, and J.D. waited on him, wanted half a stovepipe, half a length of stovepipe. You've heard the story, it's a true story. So J.D.'s back in the back cutting his stovepipe in half. Jim walks in, they had this little alley-like thing at the end of the store, just about this wide, you know, but that's where the hardware and the stovepipe and the nuts and bolts were. And he's back there sawing away, and Jim says, what the heck are you doing? He said, oh, some SOB out there wants a half a stovepipe. He turned around and looked, the gentleman walked in behind Jim. He said, and this other gentleman wants the other half. That's the end of my story. My time's up. I have thoroughly enjoyed visiting with you folks.
Now, does anybody else here have some memories about that time period, the 50s and 60s, that they'd like to share?
I'd like to just say one thing about me selling popcorn down there. I got entertained every Saturday by the old gentleman that stood out front and preached at
Ed
Van
Caldwell.
Ed
Caldwell.
Caldwell. I mean, and they drew, some Saturdays he'd draw a pretty good crowd.
Did pretty good
And
service.
so, yeah, I got a lot out of it. Cardinal, Ed Cardinal.
Ed Cardinal,
Yeah.
yeah.
And even the little midget down at the Million Motors would come up and listen to him. Remember Ham Sutton?
He was a dwarf.
He was my first boyfriend. He was. I just thought he was something
Were you
special.
short?
Huh?
Were you short?
I was always short, but I was real young, and my dad would go take me down to the Ford garage, and Ham was the only one that's little like me, you know, and I just thought I just gonna marry him.
He finally got married.
Yeah, I knew that, yeah.
And of course, Lou Allen's always had Major Little.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mike, James's dad, you know, I remember he had that guy, that stood in the window that you couldn't make laugh. You know, he
Oh, yeah.
he stood there, I mean, he never changed the expression at all. And then, I think either him or Van Adkins, one had the guy that moved crazy all the time, but they was always having something going on.
I remember
Yeah.
one man from the 50s there was a little camper trailer.
Yes.
Little round
The
ball.
fat man?
The fat man.
And they parked that trailer down by Boot Spike's
Yes.
dentist office. And you could pay a quarter
He
and
weighed
go in and
weighed
look at
700 pounds.
Look at this fat man.
Yes.
He was so big, he had popped several places. His legs had
He was a
gaping
big
wounds.
fat man. Huge fat man.
Oh, yeah.
His
But he was
pores,
worth
the
a quarter.
pores in
Now
his
let's all
skin
go
were
out and
that
have
big.
something to eat.
He had a sheet over him, and he was this big, enormous fat man. He couldn't get out of the trailer. He grew into the trailer.
Took-
Is
he
that
took
the
whole
one that
trailer,
they
took
would
one
have
whole
to keep
trailer.
on ice? They had one
They
here.
probably did keep him on ice.
Because of the summer, remember, he been here so hot.
I don't see how he lived in the summertime.
They had to have
That wouldn't be
ice.
politically correct.
That's true. You could-
Does anybody know when they started the county fair? I know, everybody looked forward to the county fair when we were growing up. That was a big thing.
I think
The
it
parade.
was late 20s, Bill, late 20s, early
They always
30s.
had.
Yeah, it's a long
During,
time,
right during the
before
Depression.
any of us.
Yeah.
Well, that was a good thing. Everybody, people come from everywhere to our fair.
Another unusual person that was here, Hubble's had Robert Wadlow, the giant.
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot about
He
that.
wore a size 23 shoe or something.
The
Yeah.
giant, named Robert Wardlow, who was a
Yeah, it had that
famous
big, his feet were so big.
Yeah.
He stepped on my Aunt
He was the
Frances.
same one that was in the movies. He made the
Wadlow.
Wadlow.
That's my shoe, remember?
I remember one other
That's my
story
shoe.
about Marion Futrell. Everybody remembers Marion. He was a local character like Jim McDaniel.
Yeah.
He and Homer Jarrett were big things.
You gonna tell that story?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell that story.
It's not PC either. Dick's gonna get off a PC.
No, I'm gonna clean it up.
Okay.
They were best friends, and they teased each other all the time. Of course, I always knew Marion was cross-eyed, and Homer stuttered. And Homer went in one day. I was there. I saw it happen. Homer came in. He was trying to tell Marion what he wanted. And Marion said, "Dadgummit." Homer said, "Tell me what you want." He said, "Well, dadgummit, if you'd look at me, I would." True story.
Well, this has been great, and Frank, you brought pictures, and so.
So, yeah, with Carroll and Dick both, I've got pictures of them. And
Yeah.
I'll show you.
Don't show those.
Very funny, yeah. Anyway, we've got refreshments over here, so get some refreshments and look at Frank's pictures and stick around and visit a while. It's been great. Next week, Virginia Stevens and Mike Dunn are going to tell about growing up here in the 40s and 50s.
All things are
The following week, we've got a change in schedule. Anna Cook won't be able to be here, but I think we're going to have, since it's the 200-year anniversary at Davidsonville, I think we're going to have the new park interpreter here telling about Davidsonville. So I'll let you know about that next week. Great. My daughter Dottie, who lives out